Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hey, everyone. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, and I can tell by your voice that you're excited to be here as well, Alex.
Yes, I just haven't turned it on yet.
Okay, start the engines.
Rev it up.
Yeah.
All right.
Rev it up.
I'm excited to be here, guys.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, we were talking just a minute ago before we, started recording about ketchup. And Alex, you said you're not a ketchup fan. And
Yeah, not at all.
And Jess, you said you would rather dip your fries in ranch than ketchup.
Oh, yeah,
And
for sure.
then Alex said, "What's your favorite sauce?" And then you said Amigos Ranch. And then you told me you can buy Amigos Ranch.
Runza Ranch.
Or Runza.
Or
Ranch,
Runza,
but I
but-
mean, preferably Amigos Ranch.
And you could buy it at Hy-Vee.
Yes, you can. You can buy a tub of Amigos Ranch at Hy-Vee
That's
in Omaha
incredible.
or Lincoln.
So Amigos, for people who maybe aren't in
So
this
if you're-
area, what is Amigos? Let people know.
I don't. Is it a
feel-
chain just in Omaha? I mean, it's a
Not in just in Omaha.
It's like
but
Nebraska.
Midwest at least.
It certainly
been
used to
around
have
forever.
its own restaurants, and now I feel like they're all combined. Like it's like Amigos,
Yeah.
a donut shop, and
Whatever else they can find.
yeah.
It's like a
Place to get
taco
tacos,
joint.
soft tacos.
I just don't remember.
crispy
I've been there. I
tacos.
just don't remember their ranch. That's it. Ranch is good.
That's too bad.
I was trying to think of the best
Do you like
ranch.
ranch?
Oh, I love ranch. I would say.
Eric.
I mean, I think Texas Roadhouse has really good ranch. I think it's got
Pepper
some top
Jack's is
tier.
definitely up there for me.
Okay, I like the spicy one there. Or do they not have that anymore? They used to have like a spicy ranch that you could get. It was very good.
Is that a Midwest thing? Because anytime
Ranch.
I travel, like East Coast,
Yeah.
when we go to visit Ben's family, they were like shocked when my kids were like, "Mom, is there any ranch?" Because they dip it in. And they were like, "What? That was a new thing."
They're dipping it in mayo,
So I don't
or is
know.
that like a Great Britain
I
thing?
think they're just using, ketchup.
Oh,
Sick.
I don't mind ketchup. It's fine. I mean, like
Now we're back to the beginning.
I would go, to a restaurant and order like a side of ranch and barbecue sauce and like kind of alternate between the two, or decide like which one of those I like better at that restaurant. Because sometimes restaurants have really bad ranch dressing.
That is true.
So, Eric, would you say that's your favorite sauce? Or maybe condiment is like a nice ranch dressing?
No, I mean, I feel, it's definitely a go-to. I don't know. It's probably a tie between like that barbecue sauce and like sriracha. I don't know. I use all of those for different things, but I don't know. It's tough to say. Depends on where I'm at.
Barbecue sauce. That is one sauce there's zero consistency across the board.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So I'm definitely a barbecue sauce snob.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
I like more of like a less thick, more of like a vinegary kind of barbecue sauce.
Well, that's like a Nashville kind of barbecue sauce.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
maybe
Yeah,
a little mustard base too.
I'm much more in the Kansas City barbecue side of things. I'd like a spicy barbecue sauce, but more of like a sweet and spicy, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot of sauces out there.
There's a lot of
There are
sauce.
so
a lot of
many
things to
sauces.
put on things.
You could just-
a lot of things to dip.
You could just dip and dip. I don't know. I get a little bit of. I do think I will judge a restaurant based on its offerings of dips. Like if they have a large selection of different types of condiments, I'll give them a thumbs up because I like that. I want variety. I want but
Can I take this a little step further and then we can just
Yeah,
move to
you
the
just
next?
keep going.
What would you choose? Like if you're getting some wings,
wing. Oh, like
What are
how
you
would I
gonna
want them
put on?
dressed? Like
what are you
this.
gonna slather those babies up in?
I mean, a traditional buffalo sauce is easily my favorite, and it's like the one I want to try because I want to know what their each restaurant's buffalo sauce, or at least what they consider it to be. But I don't know, garlic parmesan or
That's my go-to.
Something.
Garlic parmesan. Alex, you seem like you'd be a little picky from
I'm
our
buffalo. I'm not like spicy buffalo, but just their run of the mill, whatever their buffalo is.
Like a medium or a mild? Is medium too hot?
spicy, like a little spice.
No, I'd probably go
Little
mild.
heat?
Yeah. Okay.
'Cause sometimes it's the hotter it gets, I feel like the less of the flavor I actually get a taste sometimes.
Well,
There we go.
look at us.
Wow. I mean, if we're talking about Buffalo Wild Wings, I do really like the spicy garlic. That one's one of my favorites. It's like a buffalo sauce, but it's got garlic. I don't know.
Just char buff.
The great debates.
Got to char buff your wings.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, it's Super Bowl week, so I mean, these conversations do make sense because
people are busy. They're trying to plan and plot,
and we're trying to help.
Yeah.
Yep.
What dips do you want? I mean, Super Bowl season. I think that leads really well into our conversation we're going to be having today, because Super Bowl parties, other social events, man, do they ever revolve around food. And that is the acceptable way to celebrate anything. In today's topic, we're going to be weighing in on this past series of episodes we've had, kind of talking a little more about our perspective on body image and our own personal struggles with food and identity. So stay tuned for that. A sensitive subject that we keep talking about around here is food, diet, body image. There's a lot that goes with it. I feel like we've had moments to kind of interject with our guests and share a little bit, but we wanted to take some time to just share some of our personal experiences and struggles and how we relate to that. So that's what we're going to do today. How's that sound? Sound all right?
Sounds good.
We're going for it.
A little scary, but
yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it gives us an opportunity to be more vulnerable in some instances, but that is a little bit scary. Let's start out by talking a bit about the first time. I mean, you could say the first time you stepped on a scale, or I might even say the first time you were made aware of your weight or your body image, or how people saw you, whether that was for better or for worse. Like, what was that moment like? And because I know for me, and I'll let you guys think. I'll vamp while you think. For me, it was definitely later in life. I was probably in my early 20s when I really, other than one time when I was in a Walmart toy section when I was a kid, and some other kid just walked by and called me fat. And I, out of context, we were like in Wyoming. I wasn't even in my hometown. Just randomly, that's what he said, and I was like, "What?
How old did you guess you were?"
Man, I had to have been either. It was somewhere between 6th and 8th grade. I don't remember exactly when that was. They called me fatty or something. I don't know, somewhere around that. And that was the first time that maybe I felt that sting, but I didn't internalize it at that point. But then in my 20s, early 20s, like someone just kind of confronted me about it, and they talked to me in such a nonchalant way, though. Like, it was just so like I knew, and in a weird way, I didn't feel like I knew it. And then it became kind of an obsession for the rest of my life after that, of just like constantly thinking and comparing and going through fad diets and my weight rubber banding constantly. Yeah. And so that's, I don't know. It's weird how those little moments kind of stick with you. And again, I think when people maybe have not struggled with that, or, they've been blessed with just the perfect metabolism or whatever that is, they might not understand what that feels like, but there is a scrutiny that you start to put on yourself, and it's very real. And I think that when you are maybe judging people for their size, you really have to consider the fact that they do think about it, they do consider it, they are aware, but some people are empowered by it and able to embrace it, and other people probably feel a lot of shame. So hopefully I gave you enough time to think about this.
I would say for me, I definitely remember like my awareness of being on the scale and my size. I would say I was probably in my tweens. So like 10, 11, 12-ish. I think I grew up in a family, like an extended family that like banters a lot, and like a lot of jokes are like were made at others people's expenses. So then like if somebody's feelings got hurt, it would be like, oh no, we're just joking around. And so just like making light of things, but like pointing out insecurities. And then I think I grew up, I don't know if you guys remember but like I was an 80s and 90s, like that's when I grew up, like 80s baby. And so like the Three Ninjas.
I love that movie.
Okay. But then there's like a ninja and his name is Fatso. Right. And so like there's just like this growing up, like this identity of like, oh, that's the big person, that person's fat, like, and just like separating people. And then a great movie. But
It's
also
probably not a great movie.
no, I'm
but
saying like this
sorry,
next
yeah.
movie, great,
Oh,
like
sorry.
that I really enjoy, but it's like, oh my goodness, is Heavyweights.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we kind of grew up around like, okay, these people are big and like making fun of them. And I was definitely, I don't know, like looking back, I was probably normal size, but I felt bigger compared to my peers. I remember like stepping on the scale and somehow like my size and like my awareness of others then got associated with like, okay, all of this equals you when you step down here and this number equals you. So your size and your awareness of who you are. And so when I'm like looking and it's like over 100 pounds and then other people my age are like, I'm 70s or 80s. Like you just start equating like a number with a size.
Yeah.
And I think that just that awareness, like, yes, same thing, Eric, stuck with me a long time. Like even spent years like hating myself, hating my body, going through like different fad diets, like what's going on with me. But I think if I look back, it's like my value started getting tied to like a size and a number and like the culture around me. And I think it really is like what's surrounding, like when you're in your formative years of like how you're like perceiving information.
Yeah.
I don't remember like how young I was, but I don't remember like a lot of time growing up where I wasn't aware of size and people's size. And part of that is like, so my best friend growing up, his family that lived like literally they were the neighbors behind us, jump over the fence and hang out all the time. But his mom was definitely overweight, obese, and the kids were larger as well, you know, all throughout my childhood. And I always remember them kind of making those comparisons to me, like, oh, it must be nice to be skinny, like all those kind of things. And we were both just as active, like, you know, him and I, we played outside, did all those kind of things all the time. And my sisters were good friends with a girl, but I just always remember like them kind of drawing those kind of comparisons and then always feeling, yeah, that's good. You know, that's celebrated. And so I don't remember like stepping on the scale or like we weren't getting on the scale and seeing who weighed more or less. But, like you shared, Jess, I think some of those things in culture certainly were, I think of like Goonies even, and like just so much
Chunk.
of that. Yeah. Chunk. And like so much of that culture when we were young kind of highlighted these roles, you know, like the skinny guy and the big guy, and I think of Home Alone, like a lot of those things. And so I kind of always remember, you know, my friend whose name was Danny growing up. I think he goes by Daniel now, so he's really matured. But just kind of always feeling like, oh, I'm like we're the two opposites, but good friends. And so I remember that, and he would always talk about, you know, I'm husky, like that was a word, you know. And I remember the first time I don't remember how old I was, but that I didn't fit in, like that I went from, I don't know what the titles were, you know.
Like
was
the,
it like
like
thin?
the boys' sizes
Yeah. It
to
was
the
like
men's or like
slim and then regular, then husky.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
I remember like my journey from slim to regular, and then like remembering like I don't want to be husky. You know, please, Mom, don't ever put me in something husky, and just weird things like that. That I began to have this awareness of, hey, this is a thing in our lives, and food is a factor in what our body image it looks like. So
yeah, it's such a personal journey for everybody, and I think it's very interesting how, like, even with the different guests that we've had in the past episodes, hearing how they process it, how they go through it, how they view themselves and view others. And I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to think, like, how do you guys feel? Like, do you ever feel like you've made it? Like, do you ever have that mindset? Like, I'm done. I'm not improving myself. I've found the right habits. I've found the right diet. I've found the right, the way to live. Or is it just kind of one of those things where, because for me, I just don't ever feel satisfied or, like, man, I'm doing good. Like, I'm always finding that thing to criticize myself for internally, kind of my inner voice. It's like, oh, you shouldn't have eaten that, or you should have moved more today, or you should have, made better decisions, whatever that might be. Do you guys, is that a similar experience you have, or do you feel like you've come to a place where you're just kind of accepting who you are, where you are?
I think that it's a moving target for me, because I think in different phases of life, there's different things that are noticed, or it's just like, growing up in high school, there's like, you're going through puberty and you're figuring out like who you are. And then in college, it's like you're dating and your awareness of self is different, but you're like just being very self-conscious. But I think our bodies go through so many changes, like as we age. And like for me, even like getting married, having kids changed so much that I do think that for me, it feels like a moving target of something that we need, like that I feel like I need to stay on top of. But that's why I feel like I have slowed down a little bit, where maybe before I would have like been on like a fad diet. Now I'm kind of like at the place where like once I hit 40, it was like, I just need to figure out something simple that I'm done shaming myself over this, or like being so hard on myself.
Yeah.
And I just need to figure out like more simple things to do. But for me, it kind of feels like a moving target. I don't know how you guys feel. Maybe it's different for guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably been moments in my life where I've felt it's just so interesting, because there's moments in my life where I just stay away from a scale, and like I feel better, and I feel like I just see myself, and I'm like, oh, I like what I see. And then like instantly, because I don't understand like everything about my body, and how much everything weighs, and obviously you've got water weight, you've got muscle, you've got your bone density, you can get in all those kind of things. So there's moments where I'm feeling good about, man, I'm exercising, I'm eating well, all this kind of stuff, and then then I'll jump on the scale, and then all of a sudden it'll like wreck me, because I'm like, I'm satisfied until I step on a scale, and then I have numbers associated with where I've been in the past or whatever in my life. And that's where it really starts to mess with my own head, is like using the scale as a benchmark, even though I'm like, if I stayed away from that, like I would feel good. And how, especially a scale, which is, a measuring device that at the end of the day, that's what it's for, is it doesn't tell an entire story and an entire narrative, but I let it kind of control a story and a narrative in my own life. And so
it'll dictate my mood sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm almost ashamed to admit it, but it will, like, if it goes up, I'll be in a bad mood. I'm more ashamed when I realize why I'm in a bad mood. I'm not saying like I intentionally get on the scale. It's up. I'm mad. I'm in a bad mood, but it's more subconscious. I just don't realize that it's setting my tone for the day. And it's super unhealthy to be that way. But I think you're not the only one that experiences that. I think it's common. And I don't know where, I mean, you mentioned male, female, like you don't know if it's the same for guys. And I think that line is really blurry. I think I definitely believe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I've never been like what I would consider the man's man, who just doesn't care about that and doesn't, because I would almost argue that they probably do. They just don't admit it, but I may be wrong. If you're listening, you can comment and tell me I'm wrong. But It is. I do hear that a lot. I've heard that over the years. Like, oh, men don't have to worry about it and they don't have to think about it and they can just do what they want. And women have to stress over their diets and how they look.
Definitely a stereotype.
Yeah,
too.
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, sitcoms were always that way. You always had like the overweight husband and the really fit wife. And that was kind of a stereotype we saw in a lot of sitcoms and things like that. So
I think one of the interesting things that we heard, especially maybe more in Nathan and Olivia's stories, that's had me thinking is how inherited. I mean, both of them talked about the family patterns, that they kind of were handed down. So Nathan shared, like, especially about his mom and her, relationship with food being a negative relationship with food, and that's what he saw modeled, and that's the kind of the household he grew up in, and so he wasn't very surprised, that he's in the position that he's in. And then Olivia on the other side and talked about her relationship with food, which Olivia, talked about anorexia. And that kind of was something she inherited and how her family talked about food and talked about body image and all those kinds of things, which is really, I guess, had me more keenly aware of like thinking through my own, what did my childhood look like and what were the mostly probably unsaid, because there weren't a lot of conversations in my family growing up around body image or weight, or like, I don't remember my parents ever. I have no clue what my parents, even if they got on the scale now, what it would say. And I don't remember a scale being a conversation between them, but I remember my own narrative as I was growing up, that I began to write more around. Like, so I have a brother that modeled and things like that. And so for me that was like always the constant comparison game for me, was like, oh, people would make comments about that, or I would feel insignificant because of, so on and so. I'm like, dude, if you only knew, that guy doesn't ever have to work out. Like, he just looks at something, and weight falls off. And for me, I look at something and weight go in. And so that was where like I started to develop maybe narratives in my own life. But then I've noticed that is something, we and Aaron and I talk more about like calories. We talk more about like watching what we eat and things like that as like even with our family, and what are healthy things, what are not healthy things. And I've noticed like my kids, without any kind of real knowledge of calories and how they break down and how they're different, like will sometimes look at a label and say something and kind of gasp, because anything over 100 to a kid is like, oh my goodness, And so that's had me become more and more aware of how am I talking about this, and what am I handing down to my kids? What are the patterns that I'm maybe knowingly or unknowingly kind of talking to them about? Because at the end of the day, it's discipleship. I mean, these are discipleship conversations. It's unavoidable. Food is something we need if we want to continue to live. It's an unavoidable conversation. Health and physical health it's something to aspire towards. It's something our bodies are given to us by God, and they are something we're called to steward. And so for me, it's just getting into the mess of how this really does tie into discipleship in a big way, and how am I discipling my kids? And I don't have it figured out yet, but it's just something that throughout the course of these last few weeks, I've become more maybe aware of in my own life to figure out and navigate for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought that I think you want the best for your kids. And you want to be a good example. And I know for me, my journey with health, because I do know that it dictates my mood so much. Like I feel when I feel healthier, when I am healthier, it's easy for whatever, people can say it's wrong or right, but for whatever reason, I do love myself better. Like when I feel better about myself, I treat myself better, like mentally. And I think because of that, it's like a domino effect, a knock-on effect. You love your spouse better. You love your kids better. And it's not, I'm not being prescriptive or saying this is a solution for anybody, but I've seen that in my own life. And it's like, I know that's maybe dark in some ways, but it's it's also just a reality that like the more you take care of yourself, the easier it is for you to care for the others around you. And it's like that's like a hard reality to realize. And it's like it's just so much around personal responsibility. And I know it's different for everybody, but I do think, man, if you're in a place where you're struggling to love yourself and love the people around you, like taking care of yourself really does matter, and it makes a big difference. And then there is that knock-on effect of your kids seeing that and going, oh, okay, like I do need to at least, consider what I'm eating and like making sure I'm exercising. Like there's just healthy habits that you can form, where on the flip side, like my family dynamic growing up was a lot of times it was just a soothing thing. Like, oh, this bad thing happened, or let's celebrate, or let's do whatever around food. And you just create really, really bad habits. So you have a bad day and you think, oh, I should reward myself because I'm going to get a dopamine hit or whatever. And I think the other dark side of that too, for me, is just being on both. Like I've been very large in my life, and I've been where I am now, which is, not as large. At least I don't consider myself that way. But you notice, like even in social dynamics,
Yes.
people treat you. They act like you're stupid if you're overweight. Like they think you're dumb because you don't know how to take care of yourself. And it's just it is what it is. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a true thing, and it's undeniable, and you won't change my mind about it because I've experienced it. I've been on both sides. I've had conversations with people in both, from both perspectives, and so I know that sometimes people will dismiss you because of your weight, or how you take care of yourself, or what you eat, or how you eat, or all of those sorts of things. It's just a real reality, and it's sobering to me in a lot of ways, because I do think part of me just longs for, and maybe it's like not in the cards on this side of eternity, but it's like I just long to not even think about it. Like I don't want to think about it. I don't want to care about it. I don't, like, eating is a necessity, but because of my addictive tendencies to binge eat or whatever, it's like I have to treat it like I'm an addict, and like it's almost like I'm somewhat jaded towards people around me who wouldn't treat me wouldn't consider it that way too. Like if I was a recovering alcoholic, you wouldn't probably choose to drink around me. And so it's like, because I know that I have these problems, it's almost like you kind of want people to respect those boundaries too in some ways, where it's like, let's not make everything about food all the time. Let's not like try to encourage these bad habits. Like, let's not make a big deal if I order a salad or something, at a restaurant instead of what you're eating. I don't know. It's just, there's these little things where you're like, we're all going through something and we're all struggling in our own ways, but, man, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. I feel like I'm saying a lot there that maybe is all over the place, but I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around if you're going through this struggle right now, I hear you, I feel you, I understand what that feels like. And then two, if you don't understand this, if you've never struggled with it, like how can you build roads to empathy like anything else, where if what it means, what people are actually going through. But on the other side, I think there are people who just don't care, maybe they don't care. They're living their lives a certain way. They're just, they're just going to be what they are going to be, and you've got to accept that. And I
think there's a category for those people. I don't know if it's like people that care and don't care.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think too, as I've reflected on this, especially like through the episodes we've had, and just looking back, just like my awareness of myself has always been there. My awareness of like the space I take up in a room has always been there. And I even think about this podcast. I remember like being asked to be on it, and we had just had our third baby, and I was like, yeah, I can record it. Oh, it's video recorded and people are going to see me. And I already knew like, okay, I look a lot different than I did before I had kids. Like, I feel like I've gained some weight. And then like my awareness of my space of where I sit around this table, like I'm exposed, like you guys are behind, like here, and I
that was strategic for me. Yeah.
And I know we should have arm wrestled, but
Yeah.
like there is such an awareness of, for me, of just even that. And I wish that looking back, and so I wish that I would have been aware of just how much the enemy has a heyday with my value, like in this area, and like how much he has like over the years. Because to me, it's like my voice matters, like your voice matters, our voices matter, but it's like just how much power that like has been given and like exchanged when I feel like I'm like giving up my value. And so to me it's like, oh, if I'm exposed, I'm terrified that, I mean, very honestly, like that I've expected like a comment on one of our videos of like, oh, like what does she look like? Because there's just such an awareness of who I am, but like look how much that takes away from the value of like the things that I've also shared and the way that like God has used all of us like in this space to have these conversations, but like how much that dominates. And so, I think that I just,
the thing that comes to mind is I think people might hear, oh, people don't think you're dumb because of your body size or whatever. Like that's a broad stroke. You can't say that. And it doesn't matter if it's one person or everyone in the world. That one person who does devalue you because of something surface level sticks with you forever. So maybe, you're right. There's probably a lot of people who are not doing that, but you are going to hold on to that. You're going to retain that. You're thinking of that, and you're second guessing every word you say. You any decision you make, you're thinking this person's judging me. I mean, even now at a place I'm at currently, I'm more intentional right now with like what I'm eating, how I'm exercising, and that sort of thing. But I'm so scared of the like what will people say if it changes? Like what will people think of me? I mean, it's kind of mortifying in some ways. Maybe it's good. It's a good motivator. I don't know, but it's just something, like I said, I wish I didn't have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the like you mentioned, just being on here, right, on this podcast, that's not that we have millions of people watching every week, but there's this visible side of it. And so there's, for me, like this pressure probably more internally of like, okay, I want to be wholly healthy, not like an H, not H, but W, holy there. Like I want people to see me as healthy spiritually, that I'm spiritually spending time with the Lord and I'm in his word. And, but I also want people to see, physically, talk about what's happening in my life, and they're going to see it. And then there's going to be a judgment made one way or another, based on those types of things, whether that's my hair getting grayer or, my perception of my weight going up and down, any of those kinds of things. And then for me, like even, preaching or being maybe more visible, like to me, it adds more of a pressure that I'll put on myself to make sure that I'm being disciplined in those ways. Cause I think some of the ways that I think the more you're in God's word, like in a spiritual sense, like I can know when I'm, and so can other people around me. I think when I'm hangry in a spiritual sense, Matthew 4:4 says, man cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And I can notice, and so can other people notice, kind of to what you were saying, Eric, spiritually when I'm malnourished, like when I haven't been in God's word, on days that I don't start in God's word and have my devotional time, when I don't have time with God, and then everything kind of stacks up. Then I get to a meeting, and then I haven't received grace, from God. I haven't spent time with him. I haven't like realized that I'm beloved by him, and I don't go into my day with that. Then I am so much more snarky. I'm so much less able to give grace. My wick is much shorter in those moments because I'm hangry, in a spiritual sense. And the same thing, happens, physically as well. And so like, to me, I'm like trying to constantly balance, the two of those and how people are going to perceive, what that looks like, and knowing, even knowing how I perceive others based on that, and most of the time they're not vocal comments that I notice about people, but I notice people, when their weights are going up and down, and I have my own internal thoughts about what's driving that, whether that's, I've seen people go through something traumatic lately or lose somebody or have a kid or whatever. And then so you kind of start to write a script and a narrative for what's happening in someone's life when you see and so I noticed that I do that. And so maybe I'm even more hyper aware
because you do that
that I'm assuming and expecting others to do that to me. And so for me, it's
that is true.
That double-edged sword of,
because you're your own worst critic.
Yeah.
So you're like, if I'm this rough on myself, then people have got to be at least a fraction of that towards me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I think one of the biggest times that I noticed this happening or the shift happening in my life was when I started actually working here in our residency program at CCC. Like I had graduated college, and for most of my entire life, I had played sports, and that was just a dominating part of my life. So I never exercised or never quote unquote like carved out time in my schedule to exercise because I didn't think of it that way. And then I remember like, okay, I'm done with college, basketball, played that, all through high school, played in college. And so there was just like this expectation that that's just what I do. And so I never thought about food. And then I remember getting my first job where no longer is that just a part of my daily rhythm, and how undisciplined I really was and how my lack of discipline more around eating caught up with me because no longer did I have built into my schedule, the ability to exercise daily and call that basketball or call that just a part of my daily rhythm. And so I remember that was a really pivotal time in my life where I realized I don't have any kind of good relationship with food. And now I'm trying to get married and do all those kinds of things. And now I'm even more keenly aware that I want to look good or whatever, physically appear healthy. And so for me, that became a very pivotal time in my life where I started really wrestling with.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned getting married because I think a lot, you think a lot of times, someone's gaining weight, there's something bad going on. But I do think sometimes people gain weight when they're happy and they're comfortable. I mean, I heard someone saying the other day that like guys that are anywhere from like 10 to 25 pounds overweight are usually the happiest husbands. Like they're the ones that are, they're comfortable. They're not trying to over restrict themselves or whatever. So I mean, there is probably like a balance in there. It's just, but we do see it, the freshman 15 of college, and then they're like the freshman 15 of marriage. Like it happens, like people gain weight. I remember the first years of my marriage, people made comments to me like, "Oh, till you got married." Yeah. I didn't know what that meant at first.
Someone gave up on themselves.
Yeah. And it's like, well, it's coming probably from a place of comfort, and you've found someone that you care for and cares for you, and you're less worried about trying to, I guess, attract a spouse or whatever. But it is sometimes that stuff does come from a place of comfort and it can be contentment and happiness. What, Alex, I think you were kind of leaning towards the idea of how faith and food intersect. And I think of all the times all the time I have spent and wasted, criticizing myself or thinking about what I'm going to eat or what I'm eating or why I'm eating or why I'm not worthy because of my weight and all of these things. And then if I were to look at Jesus as an example, I'm thinking, well, I guess all I know is he ate a lot of fish and some bread and he walked a lot. So I don't know. I don't know what he looked like, I guess, necessarily. I don't know if he was just a healthy weight. I assume so. All the paintings I see, he looked pretty healthy. But another time, do you think people, a lot of times when we're talking about what scripture says, my logical brain kicks in and I'm just like, well, were people actually that concerned about it at the time of when the Bible was written and when Jesus was here or, walking with the disciples? They naturally exercised a lot because that was the best way to get anywhere. It was by foot. So you probably didn't have to worry about it too much. But then what does it actually say about our weight and our health.
I think one of the things about scripture, especially if you follow kind of the whole meta narrative, is there's so much, it's such a balance between feasting and fasting. Like you find both of those words inside of scripture a lot. And so much of celebratory for what God's goodness and faithfulness and all those kinds of things. You've got the Passover, you've got so many festivals and feasts that are, built around food. You've got even, what you would take from sacrifices and so on and so forth. So much of the biblical world revolves around food being a rhythm of life, and even certain dietary parts of food, no leaven, all sorts of things inside of it. And then you've got moments where it talks about, moments where I'd say it's excess. Feasting is excess and celebrating the goodness, and kind of like what we do, rhythms of birthday parties or whatever, Super Bowl, we talked about that earlier. We've got rhythms, and then you've got rhythms of scaling back or to keep from, which a lot of the fasting was. But I think some of the hard things that would be is like overlaying the agrarian culture of scripture on, and how much food is shaped by culture more than we realize. Like I think like the 3 meal a day construct and so on and so forth. I don't think most historians would say that was a something that was happening. Back in the day, you'd hunt and you'd gather and you'd do those types of things previously. So this whole 3 meal a day, even the word breakfast was like the idea of breaking a fast, and that fast would typically be longer inside of a life when you're not living in the agrarian culture, where you don't have lights and where your life is really around the calendar of the sun and festivals and feasts and all those things were the ebbs and flows of people and their relationship with food and their relationship with God, and how those two things came together, and how God is the provider of what is good and the food. And so it's been a part of nature for all of humankind. But I think in the last, couple hundred years, this idea of being more disciplined with food has just become more of a fad. It's become more of a cultural driving force. We talked in a couple episodes about just diet culture and the amount of money that's spent on those types of things, the amount of consumerism that's driven into our minds to think about food, the amount of options that we have, so it's just become a more dominant part of our lives than I think it ever has been. You can't watch TV without seeing probably a commercial about food or a diet. You can't.
Both ends of the spectrum are completely representative of capitalism.
Yeah.
It is the world that we live in.
Because
Whether they're selling you the food that makes you fat, they're selling you the solution to make you lose the weight. Like
Right.
everything is around capitalism.
And it's at the end of the day because it's a daily thing we have to do. We have to consume.
Yeah.
And so, of course, what smart way would you? If you want to make sure you have clients forever, food is that way, or dieting is that way, because it's a part of, and it's a daily reminder of, I think, especially in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus teaches this to, for us to give thanks for what I'm trying to think of the actual words. Give us this day the daily bread, and that invitation of that reliance and that dependence on God for daily bread. But most of us don't live in a world where daily bread is scarce at all.
Yeah, right.
Like that scarcity mentality. And so we just live in a fully different world. And I don't think we rely on God for we thank God in our prayers for providing our food and a lot of those types of things. But the actual dependence for daily sustenance is just so far. And obviously we're talking from a privileged Western construct, America type of place, that's not the reality for people everywhere, all over the world, but that is our reality. And so I think it's just a difficult thing for us to really put ourselves in that biblical time frame. And, even genuinely pray something as simple as that in the Lord's Prayer, to have that dependence on God for our daily bread. It's just so foreign for us. But then I would also say God does care. Like, God cares about food. You know, he does care about how we bless it. He cares about how we consume it. He cares about us and he cares about it because he cares about us, and he cares about our bodies, and he cares about all those types of things. And so that's where the tricky stuff is I think God cares deeply about us, and I think he wants us to be disciplined and make good choices. Does God care necessarily? Am I saying, does he care? And is he going to slap you on the wrist for having some Skittles? No, I don't. I don't think that. But over the long haul, God cares about how we steward our bodies. God doesn't want us to have a lot of the diseases that we bring on ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, like he's like, oh, God, heal me when I haven't been disciplined for my entire life. Like there's that oxymoron or that paradox of like,
sure.
Man, I gave you the tools to not get that disease or not get that sickness, and yet you just did what you wanted with your body, and now you're like, hey, can you fix it? And so there's that paradox that I think really gets tricky in the Christian world.
Well, and I think the interesting thing too is like Christians sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times will look at sin from what they can see. So in our current culture, things like sexual identity and homosexuality are some of the most controversial, taboo subjects out there. And I think it's because it's one of those things that people can bring to the surface. It's something you can see if they have same-sex attraction or something that they talk about. It's something open, and people get very, very hung up on that. But then when you talk about obesity, it is also something that is very visible, that you can see that people are living that type of a lifestyle, yet it is one of the things that I believe the Christian church doesn't want to touch. And it's the dichotomy of that is very fascinating to me, just to look at it and go, okay, well, because there's one thing that we are convinced that Scripture tells us is wrong, and we can point to people and tell them that they are wrong or living in sin, any type of, whatever else that might be that you can think of, a very visible sin, but then this other very visible sin, we don't really want to. And now I get like we're straddling the line of 7 deadly sins and some of those things that aren't necessarily laid out biblically. It's not one of the 10 commandments, but I do think it is interesting that how we kind of pick and choose the visible sins that we get really worked up about, and the ones that we are able to allow because of comfort, culture, whatever it might be.
And not just the truths, but even from like what I've shared today, like my information that I began gathering about myself and my identity and my physical body as a human started long, long ago. And we tend to even how I talk to have talked to myself or about myself in the past, I tend to hear God's voice through that same tone of criticism. And so one thing is that recently I've been trying to work on is looking back at what is outdated information that I am taking into this part of my life that's a lie, that's outdated, that I've kind of taken as a belief and like a solid pillar in my life that has become truth to me. It's outdated. I think that has kind of helped me process a little bit, but I had to spend some time in prayer, and even it's been since the first of this year, as we've been having these people on and sharing their stories. I had this prayer time a couple weeks ago, and I just was like, God, give me a different picture of how I view myself, and show me a picture of how you see me and how I interact with my body and my feelings about myself. Give me a new picture of myself. And I got a picture of me and all the things that I have thought about myself, like kind of just like flowing out of me, like little flags going up, and like I just saw them like being really blurry and disappearing because it was not the tone of the Father towards me. And just like how when those things come out of me, it's like those aren't the things I think about you. And a book that I've read over this past year, it's called The Tenderness of Jesus by Rob Reimer. And one thing that I've kind of taken from that, and just from the character of Jesus, is that Jesus doesn't just care about like how we feel about ourselves and want us to work on that. He cares about how we got there. So he cares about the dysfunction that we experienced. He cares about the lies that we've been told, or the things that we've been through that have kind of gotten us to the places that we sit now and where we wrestle. And it just kind of showed me like the different sides of Jesus's character, where I tend to hear a very critical voice. Like that's something I'm working on, is like hearing those tender sides of Jesus and his character. And it's such a picture. It's like, okay, how each of us have gotten to where we are is so much of like our lived life experiences and ideas and shame and information that we've kind of taken through our lives. And it's like, okay, to some degree, it's like, how can I like look at that and deal with it? And what am I leaving behind and what am I taking forward?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. And I think about our like sins that we experience in our lives or that we've committed, no matter who you are, they leave scars. And I think those scars are just reminders of God's grace and like his forgiveness. I mean, every stretch mark and flap of saggy skin is a reminder sometimes of like, oh, okay, that's who you are, that's who you were, that's what you've done. But you know, there's grace there. There's grace God gives us to see ourselves in a different light. That I think sometimes I am probably the last one to want to accept that, though. You know, you don't want to. Sometimes I don't know what that is, but sometimes it's easier just to think of yourself as unworthy or think of yourself as not the one he's talking to when you read those scriptures. He must be talking about someone else.
Yeah, and I think you can be appearing, and I think a couple weeks ago we talked about this as well, like weight or health cannot be defined by just looking at somebody, you know, whether that healthy doesn't mean a number on the scale, any of those things. But I also think whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health, whether it's any of those things, you can be perceptively, or your scales, you know, number could be low and you could be hitting a goal, but you could be abandoning a lot of mental health for things like that, or doing a lot of things. And so I think truly the most healthy we can be, and I think it leads us towards better spiritual health or better physical health, is kind of what you're saying, Jess, is first and foremost understanding my belovedness. Like understanding that like my value, how much I'm loved by God, does not go up and down. It doesn't go up and down like the scale goes up and down. It doesn't go up and down like my approval from my boss goes up and down. It doesn't go up and down ever. Like he cannot love us more. He cannot love us less. It's like us as parents, you know, and how probably feel towards our kids. Yeah, he might be bummed and might want to lead us back towards certain spaces, but I think that's the genesis of really getting healthy, whether that's physically, having a better relationship with food, whether that's mentally, whether that's spiritually. The genesis of sustained health, not just like a quick flash in the pan type of health, is first understanding we are beloved, and that God is proud of us, and that he died, you know, like with those very basic, and it feels so basic, like, oh, understanding that God loves me, that song, like Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Like that seems so elementary, and yet it is the foundational truth that healthy living actually sprouts from.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's my desires to get healthier or physically, spiritually, whatever, is not out of that. It's out of, I'm doing this in order to get love and to get approval and to do all those things. Then I'm never actually fully satisfied because I've never convinced myself that I actually attained it. Yet when I'm trying to do it out of knowing I've got that love and that approval and that unconditional support and the Holy Spirit's help to convict and convince and all those, then I've got a shot at actually making those changes in my life, which I think is pretty paramount as well.
Well, as we start to wrap things up, maybe there's some insights that we've learned, whether it's from our guests that have been on or from our own walks of life and what we've experienced, that maybe we can leave people with, whether that's, the idea of food as fuel versus food as a reward. I think a thing to keep in mind is, I think as you get older, you probably have less of you want to stay healthy, but I think that so much of culture and diet culture is built around what people would call sex appeal or something like that, where it's like you have this standard that society puts out there, and that this is what people are trying to reach, is like, okay, I got to have 8-pack abs, and I have to have, this hourglass shape if I'm a woman. I have to, whatever that is. There are all these things that, like, know that your creator made you who you are, and that you can look past those things. You can get past those images that we've just been programmed to believe are the idealistic body types, and that you're worthy of love, you're worthy of being loved, you're worthy of giving love. But what are some other quick tips we can give people or leave them with in this episode? Or thoughts, whatever.
I would say, like, just one thing I'm thinking about is there's probably people that will be listening that might not be able to relate to us and kind of where we've been on our journeys with our bodies and weight and health. But I think even, Alex, to some of the points that you made, and all of us, I'm even thinking about, man, I can take some of the things that you guys are saying and, like, really relate to that in, like, a physical way. But also, it's like there are many ways that we struggle with our identity and our value. And so just knowing that, like, the value and the identity and the promises of Christ's truth, they don't just stop, like, with where we're talking about it. This is like, if you're dealing with lots of different identity stuff or insecurity, it's like, don't just think, like, move past this episode of, like, well, they're talking about this and good luck to them. But it's like, really examine, like, what are scripts that and things that you have been carrying for decades of your life that you need to examine and to let go of. And can you ask Jesus to give you a different picture? And I just think of Isaiah 43, where it's like, behold, I'm doing a new thing, and just trusting that he will do a new thing, and he's faithful, and he can speak into those places that are hidden, the ones that we don't talk about, that, in vulnerability, like we are really sharing right now. But, we all have those even more hidden things or those insecurities, and, like, Jesus can speak into that and bring healing, even if that's a decades old, like you've said, like a scar, like a wound that's been there.
Yeah.
He can really work in that. And I really believe that.
Yeah, for me, I think it just have these conversations. I think it is so taboo to have these conversations because of all of the stuff that it maybe unearths inside of us, because of our own maybe feeling like we're too far gone, maybe feeling like, oh, people are going to know I'm more judgmental than I perceive that I am. People are going to, and I just think it's a reminder that that's what the church is about. It's about having conversations. Our walk with Jesus is supposed to be a community project. It's not just to be lived out in isolation. And so that's the way we sharpen one another, is just having these conversations, inviting somebody else into the journey, with you, if that's a struggle, inviting other people on, towards getting you are just carved out like a rock, and yet your soul is depleted right now and you have no ability to rest. Like have that conversation with people because it matters. And I think you'll be shocked by, how people embrace that and how many people are willing to help you out in the journey of wherever you're at.
Yeah. I'd say my encouragement is just start with something that's feels attainable. Like I spent my whole life trying to do these really dramatic swings and, like we said, fad diets, things like that. I would say just start with one choice and then, keep adding on from there. One healthy choice, one better choice. And I mean, I think too, like there are some basic sciences to it. A calorie deficit is a good way to like at least try to see if your body will change from that. And then if it doesn't, maybe there's other medical issues or something going on that you need to get help from a doctor and see what's going on. But I don't get too caught up in all of the snake oil out there that people are trying to sell you and telling you that these things are cure-alls and things like that. But this is one of those it's such a broad subject, it's hard to wrap up, but I think we've landed at a somewhat of a conclusion. Any parting thoughts from anyone before we sign off here? No, everyone's content. Great. Wonderful. Thanks everybody for listening or watching or however you're consuming this episode. That was a food joke. You can reach out to us on social media, on Instagram or TikTok at CCCOMA Podcast, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.